I was just going to make a quick recommendation for everybody. That's all. Just wanted to. There we go.
Well, you could call this
a pride of place.
You could call that a biography, because that is part of the true canon of Carl Jung's personal myth. That is its relevance. That's its containing vessel as well. But anyway, where was I?
Welcome back, everybody, to Jung To Live By. Now, it's coming up to Christmas season. It's coming up to New Year's season. Of course, around this time of year, we start to reflect on ourselves, on others, and where we're going in life. So, of course, the most important thing in life is depth psychology, without a shadow of a doubt. So I thought it would be a productive conversation to have, which is almost like a starter kit that you see on Reddit and websites like that. Where do we begin with depth psychology?
Well, it depends whether you start within the canon of depth psychology or you actually follow a path that brings you to it. Ultimately, you'll have to go outside of it. It's a very specialised lens in and of itself. Pauline will probably mention some things to do with that shortly, but if you want to look at depth psychology, I would say don't look at Erich Neumann. I'm sorry if that's controversial, but don't bother with Erich Neumann. What you want is Henri Ellenberger's book, The Discovery of the Unconscious, published in 1970. Absolute classic from within the whole field, not something specific to a particular byway within the Jungian canon as such. It will give you everything you need as the foundation to look at the evolution of depth psychology itself, because the discovery of the unconscious, for what it is the discovery of depth psychology and is the development of depth psychology in and of itself. So don't bother with Erich Neumann's book.
No, the discovery of the unconscious is truthful, factual, based, whereas I remember The Origins and History of Consciousness. I read that twice, actually. Why, I don't know. But I remember the third part in that is incredibly depressing. I was sitting there on the train, reading page after page. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. I still have no idea what it is, to be absolutely fair.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of silliness. Then in the final part, it's like, we're all going to die.
Wow.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Fairly evident, isn't it?
Yeah. But I presume you say the same thing about when you normally Google Jungian psychology or depth psychology, you come across the same few names.
You do.
Neumann, Edinger, even Jung's collected works. It's like you're saying, don't start there.
Yeah. Well, Neumann's book is out of date. It's out of date in so many ways. It's actually a regressive thing to engage with that. Think of it as a historical curiosity, if you like, within the Jungian canon, but the information in it is largely wrong, even where it's supposed to be factual. It's completely outdated. Don't bother with it. But Henri Ellenberger's book is still really, really good. So that would be the place that I would recommend people to go.
In case people are interested in that particular critique, that comes from Anthony Stevens, where the core, very quickly, the core thesis in that particular book, in Neumann's book, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And Anthony Stevens comes along and goes, that's not true. And we know that's categorically not true, which means it's just a nice story, or a depressing story. Doesn't really have any value at the moment.
Yes, yeah. Plus, really, you need an up-to-date definition of what consciousness is and where it comes from within the brain, within neuroscience. And specifically, I would recommend Neuropsychoanalysis and the work of Mark Solms and the late Jaak Panksepp, who was a genius in many respects and an unrecognised one, but that's changing. So, look at contemporary neuropsychoanalysis and then work backwards, and that's particularly relevant if you want to study the work of Freud. Rather than necessarily going first to some of the classic texts, I would go to where neuropsychoanalysis is now and then work backwards. It makes far more sense to do that. For example, Solms's paper on the id knows things that the ego doesn't, which you can obtain online, is an excellent neuroscience update of Freud's model and the mapping of Freud's model onto the brain. Of course, it's yet to be done for Jung, but we're involved in the neuropsychoanalytic movement, and we will be working towards doing that. But that would be the place to start there. But as I say, everybody's journey is personal, and I have a personal journey through this. I have people who have influenced me, other than Jung or contemporaneously with Jung. My own interests, rather like Jung's, are very wide. It goes into comparative religion, mythology, history, and so forth, art. All of these things you need to know. Anything which is a stimulus for creativity, basically, and for human endeavour. All of these things are the natural territory, the natural ecology for depth psychology.
Because the depth psychology is, in the broadest terms, like the study of human experience, which means your active study of the studying is depth psychology in and of itself.
It is.
Which means it's a field which is very difficult to actually classify. But I completely agree. It's like mythology versus history. Personally, and I think we've spoken about this before, history is probably more useful to a depth psychologist than mythology even is, which probably sounds incredibly strange to hear. But it's like history happened, and history's still happening, and history's rooted in biology, truly, and it's the story of the DNA that led to you. Mythology is just an abstracted story that has resonance with that history that led up to you. But there's always more to learn then on those fronts. But in terms of ROI, I mean, you've gone into where to start with Freud, which would be like Mark Solms, and how to get that general grounding in the discovery of the unconscious. What about someone like, we talked about Freud, Adler, Jung. What about someone like Adler?
Well, there are a number of works that are available. We could put some links, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
Adler's hugely important. We have discussed him before. You need to study all three. Again, we've discussed that before. So I think if we put some links into the description, if that would help to access some of his work. But things like the neurotic constitution and individual psychology. And there are many works really of Adler that are useful to look at. The problem is, of course, it's such a vast topic, a vast subject, that you could spend your entire life as a historian just studying those three and never actually produce anything yourself that's original, which is why it's important also to go into art and into creativity more broadly. I had certain books that influenced me when I was younger, from the early 70s. I've still got them on my bookshelf, alongside my second copy of Man and His Symbols. My first one fell apart. The one I've still got is from 1977, and that's up there with some of my treasured books that were influential in my own development. But you would find books on mythology, but books on history, on art, anthropology, all of these different studies, which were hugely important in my own development.
I guess it depends whether you want a career in it, or you're really just looking at it to develop yourself in some way. And obviously people live full and rich lives without ever visiting depth psychology at all.
They do.
And like you say, Steve, you can do it through all sorts of creative mediums as well. I mean, I personally find, for example, the study of anatomy and physiology absolutely fascinating.
It's another side of it.
It is another side of it, and it's a largely omitted side, unfortunately. But there's so much to learn just about that. In that sense, it's these things are open to everyone. All the books that we have here exist, and you can take your pick, can't you? Whether you, like you say, you want to look at psychology or history or mythology or art, or like I say, how the body works. Everything that you learn will add into your understanding, without a doubt. And the broader you're reading, the better, actually.
Yeah, you need a Renaissance mindset.
You do, yes.
I would say.
Yes, definitely.
Depth psychology is a Renaissance discipline. In the sense that
Renaissance man, isn't it?
On Discord,
The Discord. You can join by clicking the link down below.
Indeed. And I've always had that handle right back to the mid-90s when the internet was getting going. I've always used that. That's always been my model. The idea of being self-generated as much as possible, that you create yourself through your own study. That for me is the important thing, and very much into the classical and Hellenistic and Roman era, the classical period, if you like, of Western civilization, has been the foundation for everything that we have that's of value in the West. So that's a very important motif for me, personally.
Just to ground this slightly, because we're going to get lots of questions about this. We've covered Freud and Adler, we've not actually covered Jung. And people are always, you probably get this in DMs all the time, what books do you recommend by Jung? So in the context of what you've just said, you don't need to. It's bespoke and it's nuanced. But if someone's so inclined, would you point them in a particular direction?
Yes, I would, Without doubt, there are two works that you must have. Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his autobiography, and Man and His Symbols. And you actually don't need anything else to get you going. Those two are sufficient, because both are statements by Jung himself at the end of his life about the meaning of his work in the context of his life. And he's very, very clear about it in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that work in particular is his public account of his personal myth. If you want to understand Jung, you must understand his context. Don't understand a fantasy about it. The kind of thing which is prevalent on the internet at the moment, pushed by internet entrepreneurs and manor-type personalities out there. Go to the primary sources, the original sources, but in particular those two works. That will give you the compass to understand everything else. And then when you encounter his collective works, follow them from the beginning, as he himself intended and suggested that you should. Go right back to Volume 1, Psychiatric Studies, Volume 2, Experimental Researches. Those two, before you go anywhere near Ion or anything like that, go to those two. And there's a Finger lectures as well from his university days, which are supplementary volume from the collected works. I don't know if these are very popularly known.
I don't think so, actually.
This is a very slim volume, but this is... I don't know if we can see that. Can we zoom in on this?
We can always do a little bit of editing, and people are seeing the editing right now.
Good. Yeah, this will give you a lot of information about his mindset before he got into medicine. And from this, you will be able to pick up on the influences on him in his background, which are absolutely seminal on how he developed his ideas. So something like that will be important. Obviously, for those of you guys who are into Nietzsche, there's Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Jung's analysis of Zarathustra. This will take you a long time just to plough through this, if you think it's worth it. If you think it's worth the effort of doing that.
Isn't the seminar incomplete as well?
Yes, there's a lot more papers to do with Nietzsche's works and other seminar notes as well. There's one on dream analysis here, and there are others that have come out. So, yeah, there's a lot to look at.
So, we've spoken about the influences and early supporters of IPSA, and you guys, of course, Franz Jung being one of them. But we've got characters like Ernest Rossi, Anthony Stevens. Would you recommend guys dive into any of their works, and if so, any in particular? With George Engel, which from our perspective, he's seminal because he provides the framework for how we practice. It's important to understand a few things about him. He was a psychoanalyst, a Freudian psychoanalyst who had an interest in how psyche and soma, mind and body, interacted and produced disease, and then how you could work with somebody at many, many different levels simultaneously to change disease processes, including psychological disorders. So look up George Engel, Professor George Engel, on the internet and read his papers. That's the best advice I can give on that. That will give you an objective framework. But bear in mind, he was a Freudian psychoanalyst, so he did understand the psyche. And as the guys probably know, he supported Pauline and I in 1990, or from 1990 until his death in 1999, very favourably. And he didn't hold it against us that we were into Jung, even though he was into Freud. That wasn't what was important to him. A great guy, a really great guy, highly respected by us. Rossi, who was Ernest Rossi, sadly recently deceased. If you look him up on the internet, you'll be able to get a huge amount of papers which show how advanced that guy was. And he was both a Freudian and a Jungian analyst, and the editor of the collected papers of Milton Erickson on hypnosis, and a psychobiologist, and a professor of neuroscience. Very impressive.
In our view, he's a genius, or was a genius.
He was well ahead of his time.
He's so far ahead that we're probably not going to catch up to him fully for maybe another 30 years. It will take a generation of therapists who can integrate neuroscience and depth psychology and hypnosis from this moment onwards, a whole generation, before we'll even begin to see the wider implications of his work. Although we've been using his work for nearly 30 years, and he was a supporter of our work. in particular of the breakthrough that Paul and I made with respect to the role of carbon dioxide regulation, acid-base disorders in psychosomatic conditions, and in the etiology and pathology of Jungian complexes. So an incredible guy. Anthony Stevens, anything you can get hold of by him is good.
Pretty much, actually, yeah, you're right.
Anything. As I think I mentioned in another video, he is now, because of the passage of time, something of a transitional figure. A transitional from an orthodox Jungian into the new generation of depth psychologists who are emerging now and have been emerging for 20-25 years, who are concerned with neuroscience, with biology, evolutionary theory and so on. But he was one of the first and one of the best, and an early supporter of Pauline and I, and of what we were doing with George Engel's work with respect to Jung, and also the work of the people at Charing Cross Hospital in London as well. He supported our integration of that. Highly respect him, really do, and that respect will live on forever. He's a really great guy. Anything you can get by him, and he wrote a really good biography on Jung. I'll just show you. One of the best. It's one of the best because it's practical. On Jung by Anthony Stevens. So if you can still get this, it is hard to get, but if you can get it, this guides you through Jung's life in terms of Jung's own model, and it's an analysis of that. He doesn't really touch on some of the critiques. He's quite kind to him, but it's still a really good book because it does show how you need to address the phenomenon of Carl Jung in terms of the development of his own model and his own personal myth. Hugely important work in my view.
While you're at the shelf then, Steve, because people are probably interested, have you got any of those books you mentioned that were an influence on yourself that aren't necessarily classic psychology?
Yes, I have. Of course, is my tatty copy of Man and His Symbols. That's the first thing I'm going to get. This one is, I dated it, as you can see on there, James.
Oh, it's 1977. That's a year I'm not sure even existed.
It did. Price on it,
I think it might do, yeah. £2.95 this cost in 1977. Yes, so this with Memories, Dreams, Reflections, definitely before you touch anything else with respect to Carl Jung, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, huge influence on me. I can't overstate how important I think this book is if you're studying depth psychology. This is a hugely significant introduction. Superb. Some of the other books you mentioned, James, that were personally of influence on me. This one by Mike and Nancy Samuels from, again, 1974, this one, Seeing with the Mind's Eye. This was a really good book with respect to the use of imagery, meditation, techniques, things like that. And again, if you can get it, it's a classic, and I would highly recommend it. I used to take this into the police station. Sorry if that's in front of you, James. You're tall, you can raise yourself up. I used to take this into the police station and annoy my sergeants and inspectors because I was reading weird things, which of course just encouraged me all the more. But they obviously gathered from the fact I was reading stuff like that and was serious about it that I wasn't particularly serious about being a police officer, and they were dead right. But yeah, excellent book. And another one from the same period, The Roots of Consciousness by Jeffrey Mishlove, who is still on the internet. He's still active today.
And a proper library here.
Proper library, there you go. Another really good book. Carl Jung's mentioned in here. There's all sorts of techniques and methods and analyses of using imagery, art, creativity, that kind of thing. Parapsychology, which is another important thing to get yourself into if you're studying Jung. So these were three of the sort of seminal works that I really focused on, and that's why they're so dog-eared, because I was never really putting them down. So yeah, excellent books.
And what about yourself, Pauline? You've been awfully quiet.
Well, I guess my contribution will be different, really, because my sort of journey's been different to yours, hasn't it, Steve? Although obviously it overlaps as well. I don't even know if you can still get this pop it on there for a minute. Mental Disorder by Jack Little, and it's a good basic psychiatric textbook, probably one of the best. And you know, I think I have seen it recently actually on it might have been Amazon. I'm not sure whether they're new copies or you know, you can only get them second hand, but it is a particularly good psychiatric textbook. And whilst I wouldn't want anyone to sort of kind of look at it and try and diagnose themselves, he's obviously I mean, he's well versed in all the various psychological theories as well, which is quite, certainly for the day, was probably quite unique actually. But also his application of the theory in the context of what would have been then a modern day psychiatric unit is really very interesting, because a lot of stuff about basic care and everyday activities and how all those kinds of things were managed and taken care of. And I haven't really found anything to surpass that.
No, it's
in
really
that
good.
Specific genre anyway.
Yeah, you mentioned Jung too, doesn't he?
Yes, he does actually. Yes, there's quite a bit about Freudian defence mechanisms as well.
Yeah.
And it's just a very good overall psychiatric textbook if you're thinking maybe of working in that field. Maybe that, you know, that's the direction you're about to go in. So definitely that one. The other one that Steve just handed to me is, we've mentioned this before on other podcasts, haven't we?
One of the favourite books of the channel, I think.
Yeah, probably, yes. Coming Together, Coming Apart by John A. Destian, who started out as a divorce lawyer and then became a Jungian analyst. And it's theoretical in part, isn't it? It's quite technical in part, because there's a lot of stuff in there about alchemy, but it's also, there's a lot of case studies as well, and he relates the alchemical process really well to what happens between couples in relationships, but usually when things go wrong. And given that he's got a background as a divorce lawyer, it kind of makes an interesting read, but it's practical as well.
Very,
very, very practical.
Very
which,
practical.
You know, at the end of the day, if things don't actually impact your everyday life, it's hard to say what the value of them is. So that I would definitely flag up. I mean, we've sort of referred to it a lot, haven't we, over the years?
Over the years, we used to actually prescribe that book, didn't we? To couples back in the 1990s.
Yes.
Again, before the internet, we'd send them off to the local bookshop, and there were loads on the shelf because so many people were coming in, weren't they? Because of the fact we'd referred them to go there. And that would be like a basic framework, wouldn't it, to understand the depth psychology of relationship issues. Yeah. It's an excellent book, and practical alchemy.
Yes, which is how it should be. In a psychological sense. Yeah. So, you know, okay, you get the allegory of alchemy as such woven into it, but what does that actually mean for relationships, and how can you understand them in that context? And it's very, very good. It's unique, actually.
It is unique.
I say it's a unique work, really. Yeah, so definitely those two. Gosh, what else?
You got
so much.
Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Yes, I mean I've kind of pushed that a lot. I'll just see if I can find it first. It's
significant book, though, isn't it?
It is a significant book. Yeah. Although I do like my anatomy and physiology textbooks, and I must be honest. Yeah, we do mention this one a lot, don't we? Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, I think you pronounce it.
Another dog-eared book as well.
It is, and with all sorts of little bookmarks and things in it. Oh yeah, I mean the beauty of it for me is that you can open it at any page and find something of value on that page. You don't have to read it cover to cover. And I mean, we've actually, although it's Women Who Run with the Wolves, we've encouraged quite a few men to read it as well, haven't we?
Yeah, because of the instincts.
Yes. And she's probably one of the few Jungian authors that I've found that actually addresses instincts properly.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, is to do with her background and where she grew up and her connection to nature and so on. So she's always factored that into her work and her writing, and it's coming back now that we're sort of involved with the neuroscience and Mark Solms' work. It's revivified this book for me. It's given me almost a different or new appreciation of it. I mean, I've always valued it, but that really brings that work now. Really,
we've
brings
had that
it
over
home.
25
we
years.
have. We have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you used
Yes.
to prescribe that, didn't you,
That was
to
another
women
one. Yes.
when you worked with women's groups and,
Yeah.
and others? So it was
Yeah.
really important.
Yes, I mean there are other ones, but that stands out. I mean, it's there's so much in that, and the value, obviously, of storytelling, of fairy tales, more than myths even, and how healing they can be because of the way that they present solutions to things as well. They don't just describe the situations that people find themselves in, but they bring about that kind of completion that people are looking for when they're looking to solve problems in their lives. So very, very good text for women in particular, but I think men can benefit from it too.
It's funny how you can see Pauline through these 3 books, actually.
Oh, I do
because
apologise. Well, I'm not bothered about
No. No, I didn't mean that.
Oh.
You've got instinct,
I
relationships,
see.
and
Yeah.
medicine,
Yes.
which are 3 of her primary interests.
Yeah, and
I thought you were
art.
going to say
And
about
art.
being mental or something when you pointed to that
Mental.
one. Like,
But this is like a very humanistic form of addressing psychiatry, and that was the
Yes,
way
it is.
the way she did it when she worked in both acute and chronic psychiatry. That was
Yes.
the way she was.
Yeah.
She has a very strong interest in relationships and a very strong instinctive connection to human nature as well. So that kind of sums her up for me, which is quite odd. Oh, and this one too. We're going to have to move on. Should we move Jack a little?
Yeah.
We'll put Jack back. This is a good one too.
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
another good
Before
one. Practical Jung by Harry Wilmer, Jungian analyst as well. I think he did a lot of work with Vietnam vets, didn't he, Steve, as I recall?
Yeah, post-traumatic stress
Post-traumatic
disorder.
stress disorder, yes. Yeah. And it's just a completely different kind of format in the way that it's laid out, and the drawings in it are his own artwork. And as the title suggests, it's a very practical book and a very practical way of working with Jungian ideas, and that was another one that I had with me when working in psychiatry, so that's another one that's quite close to my heart, really.
The TV series which you can get on YouTube, Jung, The Wisdom of the Dream, you can see Harry Wilmer working with Vietnam War vets.
That's right, you can. Yeah.
And he again was interested in real solutions.
Yes.
Rather than fantasies. He was very based in today's parlance. Great guy. Someone else who's influenced us greatly. And again, this was a book that we would prescribe to patients, and also it was a set reading on our training courses back in the 80s and 90s as well.
Yeah, it's just nice to be able to have someone who's summarised. Okay, it's his own take on things.
Sure,
which is absolutely fine. But again, it's very readable. You can flick through and just come in at any page, and you'll learn something. So I quite like that.
Yeah, really good stuff. And what's that one there? Well?
Oh well, this is a bit of a heavy one, really. This is a colour atlas of human anatomy. I can have to just tell that
we
one
need
up,
more
I think.
stands.
which I won't open because it's a bit gruesome inside, really. But I personally find it absolutely fascinating. I think, given that we take a systems approach to things, the idea of being able to go from, the body is a piece of art almost, that you can draw and sculpt and paint, and you can be interested in any sort of the musculature and the...
Just move that so we can see it. Yeah.
Thank you. The tendons and the ligaments and the organs within, but to be able to go from that right the way down to a cellular level, I find that absolutely fascinating, and obviously it's in keeping with how we look at things anyway, and how we understand human nature and people as a whole, and how we like to solve problems, and so for me, I could never take that out of the equation. I just find that absolutely fascinating. And of course, if you're trying to learn about the body yourself, you don't have to come in at that level or have something quite so explicit as that. I mean, I've got things, for example, like I probably won't be able to get them out because they're right underneath a pile of books, but things like the colouring books, the human anatomy colouring books,
which
and
are
the physiology
medical,
one.
for training doctors.
They are.
So, it says colouring book, the series.
Yes, they are
they?
series books, and I think there's one on neuroanatomy as
There
well.
is, there is indeed,
Which are just absolutely great, because you can literally just learn whilst you're colouring them in. If you're inclined creatively to colour things in, then, kill two birds with one stone. So they've been very good as well, and very useful.
They have.
And that would give you a kind of, if you wanted to say, for example, study Rossi's work more closely, it would give you a backdrop to the basic anatomy and physiology for you to then sort of build on.
Rossi works very much mind to molecule.
Yes, he does. He does. I mean, it's more sophisticated again.
No. I'm saying he does that.
He does.
But there is the biology. There's the fundamental anatomy and physiology. Yeah, the surface anatomy, the motor mechanical anatomy, and then the basic way that nerves work, motor and sensory sense, and all of that's important.
Which
to
is useful
understand
to have. It's the chassis again, isn't it, for everything else?
It's the chassis. Yeah, and of course, beyond mind and molecule, there is the social environments as well, and this is where George Engel comes in and extends Rossi into that, which is important. Aye, done it. These are 3 of the classic Rossi works. This was the first one I think we had, wasn't it?
Yes,
Mind-body therapy.
Yes, it's probably the easiest of the 3 to get through, actually.
Psychobiology of gene expression, which would be more James's field, being a molecular biologist.
Really good as well.
And the psychobiology of mind-body healing. I'd say Rossi is sadly passed. 19th of September 2020. Huge loss. But these are foundational texts as well. Unless someone wants to avoid the absolute truth, the absolute reality that mind and body are the same thing and they interact and communicate. It's so important to understand this if you're going to work as a therapist. Otherwise you'll limit yourself down to being what we call psychoreductive, which is just a nonsensical way of approaching the human condition. But this is all about real healing, right down to the level of the genome, by using your mind, and the bridge to do that is hypnosis. This is why it's so powerful.
This is a lived life, isn't it?
It's a lived life, yeah. Well, we're both into Rossi. I would approach it from the psychological side, and you'd probably approach it from the physiological side, wouldn't you?
Yes, probably. And we'd meet in the middle.
Well, one hopes so. Yes, one hopes so.
Yeah.
They're pretty good books.
They are excellent. Yeah.
You can get a lot of Rossi's papers online as well. And probably PDFs of some of these, but if you want them in book form, these are the ones. There are other books. This is the late, sadly they're all passing, the greats. J. Haley, Uncommon Therapy. This is Milton Erickson applied to family therapy, and under the broad umbrella of strategic therapy. Another absolute genius. Again, foundational. If you're going to work as a clinical therapist with families beyond just, say, relationships, this is the must book to have. And it will link very closely with Rossi's work, actually, just at a different level of analysis, description and explanation, because both Rossi and J. Haley work with Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson is the connection between the two. Hypnosis as a modality of therapy is much misunderstood. It is the original psychotherapy. And psychotherapy, as we understand it now, has 2 birth parents. We've said this before on the channel. One is medicine, specifically neurology, and the other is hypnosis. They are the 2 authentic parents of psychotherapy. And Milton Erickson is probably the greatest hypnotherapist who's ever lived at a psychological level. Rossi, I would argue, has gone much further, but his genius is not fully understood yet. But this is the social application, if you like, the interpersonal application of Milton Erickson's ideas, with strategic, focal, brief therapy that is outcome orientated rather than theory, rather than rumination, rather than fantasy. This is doing something for real, and it's hugely important. I'd add 2 other books to that.
You'll be breaking everybody's wallets, I think.
This is by Bandler and Grinder.
Oh, Patterns 1 and 2.
Patterns 1 and 2. Volume 1, Volume 2. The founders of neuro-linguistic programming. So basically, these cover language patterning, which is incredibly important. The application of Noam Chomsky's transformational grammar to understand how to communicate and how to generate imagery, and the communication being very, very deep structure rather than surface structure in the mind. Excellent. So whatever you think of NLP, as it subsequently developed, these 2 volumes taken together with this, with J. Haley's book, and then with Rossi's works, even before you go anywhere near Milton Erickson's original collected papers, which I would argue you don't actually have to do if you pick the right books, you will gain a huge amount of technical skill, real world skill, from properly ingesting these works and then working with other people. Hugely valuable.
I'm collecting lots there, probably.
Oh
I
no.
am indeed. Oh no.
I've got to take these all back now.
No, you don't.
I will, of course I will. There you go. I'll hand over to my lady wife.
While you're not looking, Steve.
Well, I'm not looking.
Yeah, life types.
Oh, right. Which version is that?
That's the
updated one?
updated one. Do you want me to get the old version as well?
No.
Okay,
Updated,
come back again then.
Updated's fine.
Yeah. Well, we found it's probably, and we've got a lot of books on typology, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Again, another one that we would recommend to patients on a regular basis, really, if they wanted to get a handle on it, to get to grips with it. Having said all of that, obviously we've kind of moved away from theory to our own empirical observations of typology, which tend to be more useful. But nonetheless, if you do want to read about it, it's probably, again, one of the most user-friendly versions of it, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Some books are very technical, and
I'm not sure how updated this one is actually, because the Myers-Briggs has changed a number of times.
Yes, I don't think it will be. I don't think it's got those modifications in it actually.
No, it's the original, is it?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. But Myers-Briggs has changed, and it's changed in such a fundamental way. It falls into a nice, neat little quaternity now of opposites, and how dainty and quaint is that? When in the real world, you never meet anything like that unless you force that structure upon somebody.
Any understanding of biological variability will show that kind of thinking is nonsense.
Yeah.
Or you're just making sort of the error bars so wide that it then becomes sort of silly.
Yeah. That's pretty much how it is.
Yeah, but it would give you an overview. If you just as a compass on the compass of the MBTI, then it will,
for sure.
It will inform you. You know, it's just a case of having a language. If other people are talking about this kind of thing, it would be a good introduction.
It would. And again, we used to prescribe this for patients.
We did.
And it was a set book on training courses.
The most common, we were asked all the time, when we're doing it, about books that someone should read, but one of the most common topics is typology. What resources do I go to? And I'm always there like, understand the cognitive functions, and they're like, well, how do I do that? It's difficult. Is there anything else around typology that you would recommend, just off the top of your head?
What about you, Paul? We've got tons, haven't we, of different perspectives.
So much of it, really. Some of it gets a bit sort of hairy-fairy, doesn't it, when you get into things like dancing
this is hard
the wheel.
To get now.
Yeah, dancing the wheel of psychological types, for example.
Yeah. Have you got Sposo's book there?
No, it's not. I think it's in your pile, not mine.
Pile? Must you
on your shelves. Our shelves.
It's my age there. There we go.
Yeah.
Jung's Typology and Perspective. This guy's still quoted quite a lot by informed people on typology. And then there's Joe Wheelwright's book. Not specifically about typology, is it? But
no, it isn't.
This guy was a bit of an outlier. Because he was an extroverted intuitive with feeling. And he, with his wife Jane and a chap called Gray, created the very first Jungian type test called the Gray Wheelwright scale, which is very hard to get. We have it, and it's issued on our training courses. But this guy is a wonderful raconteur, and he uses feeling properly, and he uses his intuition properly, doesn't he?
Yeah. Very warm.
Very warm.
In interview,
the late Joe Wheelwright. Again, you can see him being interviewed on Jung, the Wisdom of the Dream on YouTube.
Yes.
I would highly recommend you look at this guy's work. If you want a warm and feeling Jungian style relationship, as a man, this is a really good guy to model yourself upon. Didn't take himself seriously, but he was serious. He was serious inside, but warm and open in his relating. A good man.
Well, he was drawn to it because he had difficulties in his own marriage, didn't he? And
With
he
Jane,
wanted,
yeah.
with his wife Jane, and he wanted his marriage to work. And for him, this provided lots of solutions to that.
Yeah.
I mean, we often say these days, don't we, that with respect to typology, that in and of itself, it's not enough. To do it properly, it's so much more nuanced than you'll find in any book, and you actually need to know a lot of other things to do it well. So it should always be in the broader context of psychological work.
And of course we have to have this.
Oh yeah.
Of course, psychological types. Which is the original? And it's very interesting, not just for historical purposes.
This is probably closest to.
Those
out
two
of all
are
of them.
close.
Yeah.
This is the theory, and this is the lived experience
Yes.
of Jung's original model, and that's important. Myers-Briggs is the most popular separation from this, and it is a separation from it. It's important to understand that. And Jung never authorised Myers-Briggs, never recognised it, and was generally dismissive of type tests as being for beginners. He thought clinicians had to do it on the basis of meeting the person that they were working with in the moment. But this is very, very interesting. If you want to understand Jung's personal myth, again, you need to understand this, because that's why he wrote it. He wrote it to explain himself to himself and why he was different to both Freud and Adler as individual personalities and how they came to develop their own theories. That's the true origin of his type model. It's got nothing to do with the way it's presented on the internet now by the various type entrepreneurs out there. They just talk drivel, a lot of them, frankly, because they haven't lived enough and haven't related enough to understand the nuances that emerge from repeated experience of working with people in depth over decades. It does take that, I'm afraid, to fully understand something. And that's no offence against younger people, because we all have to get that experience.
Yeah.
It has to come over time. There's no other way for it to happen, I'm afraid.
Don't look at me like that. Well, don't look at me like that then. Nice. Another good one by Anthony Stevens called Withymead, which was about a therapeutic, or is about a therapeutic community at the end of I think it was the
Second
World War.
Yeah, when he went there, it was the end of the
when
Second
he
World.
actually went there, yeah. And again, it's probably a very personal book to me, again, because of my background in occupational therapy and my sort of quest when I was involved to bring creativity into psychiatry. This was a unique place. This is a place where people could go to rehabilitate, and they would stay, and with all sorts of mental health issues, and they would be allowed to let their creativity run free, to do whatever they needed to express themselves and to get well, and to kind of convalesce, really, at the same time. This idea of just taking yourself out of society into an environment that was warm and supportive and encouraged creativity was probably highly significant. And sadly, you know, modern day psychiatry doesn't really resemble anything like that. It should do. That should be the essence of what happens in psychiatric units. But my experience of it is that it's anything but that. But it's a book that, again, that's close to my heart for that reason, because it's just so inspiring, and it's where modern day psychiatry should be at, and how we've managed to sort of come from this to where we are today is I guess very sad indictment of the times that we live in. But it's a book worth looking at. It is.
Was the value of creativity as applied.
Definitely, yes.
And then all the depth psychology comes through from that. All of it, all the creativity that is considered normal when it's not pathologised, is put into a proper perspective. And again, very much of our training courses in the second year, this kind of material is utilised. So we develop people's creativity and their conscious enactments, if you like, or interaction with the psyche in depth, to really develop themselves, and that was used that way. Anthony Stevens is just amazing, you know, still super respect him and his contributions to the field.
Well, he was so encouraging to us, and,
Yes.
and so open in his support and encouragement, and
Yeah.
there was no sort of professional rivalries
No.
or anything
No.
like that. It's the thing that stood out for me, that it was a case of, well, if you can, take some of my ideas and you can develop them on, that's absolutely fine.
And mix it with George Engel and Peter Nixon, and Peter Nixon being the guy at Charing Cross.
To that, and fantastic.
And said he was delighted that we were making a synthesis of their
ideas. You couldn't be more open than that, could you?
No.
Really? No. So that's another book that stands out to me, and this little book, not really in and of itself. It's called Art Techniques Made Clear, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this book particularly, but anything that will give you, if you are a budding artist, for example, or you feel that you want to express your creativity through the medium of art, then it's useful to have something that gives you some structure sometimes, because a lot of people struggle with this. Well, I don't know where to start. I don't know what medium I'm drawn to. I don't know how to get a proper perspective on things. And anything, I think, again, that gives you a bit of a compass, a bit of a leg up is helpful, because you might find then that what's within will have a vehicle to express itself, and that's so important.
Yeah.
And little books like that, and not just this, but I'm thinking too of people like, probably a lot of people have heard of him because he's very popular, Bob Ross. Somebody like that who, it's called his series, which I think was late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I think so.
Roughly around that time period. I call The Joy of Painting, and it's that idea of connecting with your instincts, of experiencing the joy of creating, and that's so valuable, so valuable, because you will literally plumb those depths. And he's somebody, actually, having said it can be useful for some people to have structure. He paints purely from imagination. And so for anyone who prefers to do it in that way, he's a good guy to look at.
Oh, indeed.
Really.
And this should be seen in the context of this.
It should, yes.
From a depth psychology perspective, that is a technical basis, I think you're saying,
Yes,
with respect to what this can produce,
That's right.
both as an applied therapy and in self-development as well.
Very much so. Yeah.
Oh.
But you can still find the Bob Ross stuff on YouTube. It's still out there, and just fantastic stuff. You can see, how obviously his way of doing it is unique to him, but it allows you to actually create something relatively quickly. Even as a beginner.
Yeah.
To tell you how to lay your palette out and what kind of colours to use, and how he uses the brushes he does and the way that he does. And there are so many positive and inspiring people out there that could help you to get going on this kind of thing. And the same will be true probably for people who write, like you and James as well, I'm sure, who inspire.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it's probably a bit different for me. Inspiring writers for me is a difficult one, to be honest. I would look at people, believe it or not, like H.G. Wells, who inspired me when I was very young, and even this chap, Edgar Allan Poe. It's the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe. That image on the front, by the way, is someone being hypnotised at the point of death, in articulo mortis, or mesmerised. That's how old the book was. The term hypnosis, or the story, the term hypnosis had not yet been invented, but mesmerism was understood. And it's a fascinating depth psychology story in its own right. What would happen to somebody if they could be mesmerised or hypnotised at the point of death, so their mind survived? And of course, being Poe, it turns into a nightmare that the guy's mind is trapped inside a decomposing corpse, yearning to be free, and for the mesmerist to lift his soul out from his rotting corpse. Yeah, but that aside, we used to print that that particular story and use that as an example of a cultural representation of hypnosis for our students, again back in the 80s and 90s. That was just a perchance to speak, on that topic.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more in the Anthony Stevens canon that I would highly recommend. The original Archetype and Natural History of the Self. He's updated it back in 1992, I think, but this is the original book. This is the one that got us into Anthony Stevens. And when we read this, there was no going back. This is 1982. At that time, I was being significantly influenced by Professor Stephen Rose from the Open University, and his model that he called dialectical identity theory, which basically is saying the kind of thing that Mark Solms talks about now, where he calls it dual aspect monism, to say that brain and mind are the same thing. Dialectical identity theory said exactly the same thing. It said the brain and mind are the same thing, written in 2 different separate technical languages, and if you use the language of psychology you get one resolution, you use the language of biology you get another, but they're essentially the same thing, opposite sides of the coin. He also taught me, Stephen Rose, about systems thinking, and that was so eye-opening. And then this hit me, and it was like, whoa, there is no going back now. I have the framework, which is the systems model. I have the way of blending the different explanatory languages, which came from Stephen Rose, and now we have a biological basis for Jung. And I've always been interested in neuroscience, always. Again, that was Stephen Rose's influence. So this was the door, wasn't it? Really, for both of us, that really opened it up. Pauline was always interested in medicine, and this again was a way of linking Jung to medicine, as indeed is this, which is really Evolutionary Psychiatry by Anthony Stevens, or he's one of the 2 authors, the main author. And this is putting psychiatry into a Jungian evolutionary framework. And then you get the breadth of Anthony Stevens by looking at Wivy Mead in the middle. This is the creative process. The creative process with biology and psychiatry linked together. That's the genius of the man before anyone else was doing it. And why he was such an influence to us, and why it was so wonderful to receive his support for what we were trying to do and did do. So yeah, Anthony Stevens, bang on, the man, definitely. As a transitional, now sadly historical figure between the old Jungian world and the Jungian world that is coming right now. Fabulous material.
He's still alive too, isn't he?
He's still alive. He's retired. He's living in Greece.
Yes.
We had some contact with him a few years ago, which was nice after 25, 30 years since our first contact with him, which is 31 years ago now. But yeah, he'd retired. He lived in a beautiful farm and a manor house in Devon originally, but he's retired to Greece, where some of his other interests are to do with the classical period of Western civilization, and no doubt he feels that his soul belongs there. And I would say, yes, you are on that level. You are doing what they were doing way back in the Hellenistic period, that which the Renaissance tried to bring back into Europe, that idea of learning as much as you can and bringing it all together to understand the bigger picture. This man did for Jung and Jungian psychology. Without these kind of efforts, it would have gone down, it would have gone away and been treated as an irrelevance, which sadly some people do treat it as. But with this biological and creative foundation joined together, that provides everything that you need to build a 21st century interpretation of Carl Jung. I can't recommend him higher. More higher than that, really. Brilliant.
And a bit left of field, really. This is a little one for the ladies amongst us, and it's called Water and Sexuality by Michelle O'Donnell. And it's a book I bought when I was pregnant with our son, Gareth, and again, as you might expect, there was a reason behind buying it, because of the overlap with, I guess, the way that we were living our lives and still do, and he highlights the importance of water for women in giving birth, how obviously archetypally it's connected with the feminine, but women seem to be drawn to it anyway, instinctively, and we actually paid him a visit, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Back in, 1993?
Three or four?
Yes.
Three, probably.
Probably three.
Yeah.
And obviously we were there to sort of get his advice about, how to progress with the pregnancy with our son and the imminent birth. And his best piece of advice was, get yourself a good midwife, basically. And when you think about it, it sounds such an obvious thing to say, but the thing that he tries to do with women is to put them back in touch with their instincts around the time of giving birth, because if you think about how modern births tend to take place, even though obviously things have come a long way and they offer birthing pools and balls to sit on and all sorts of things, nonetheless, you're still in a very artificial environment, which by and large is sort of brightly lit, and lots of medics at hand and doctors and nurses coming in and out and doing repeated checks and all that kind of stuff. He would steer away from that completely and just allow the process to unfold naturally. And a lot of the women that gave birth at his clinic would give birth standing, and obviously there would be like an attendant midwife as well. He would be involved with a lot of the births, but he would always have a midwife to deliver the babies as well. And when you look at more less well developed societies and cultures, a lot of the young women they'll go out into the woods, the forest on their own and squat down and just go through that process instinctively themselves. Yeah. And for me, I'm not suggesting that all births can or should happen in the way I've just described, but it was just that principle of women being allowed to be instinctive about the whole process that really appealed to me. And he would probably even go as far as to argue that the partners shouldn't be there either, that men shouldn't really be attendant at
He did say that.
He did say that, and it's an interesting idea.
I respected it, and
you did. Yes,
it turned out that I was present for
present.
both births.
You absolutely were.
But I did respect that.
Yes, and for me personally, not that I didn't want you there, because it was wonderful to have you there. But for me, I wanted you there to protect me from the people who were there.
Yeah,
fundamentally.
The boundary, and that's the instinct, isn't it? And also for anyone who might cross the line.
Well, that's right, because I didn't entirely trust the people who were there to deliver my children, unfortunately. But if you are fortunate enough to be able to maybe have a home birth or decide on the way in which you want it to take place yourself, and there are no medical reasons or complications as to why you shouldn't do that, then this arguably is a very good way to go, and this little book was certainly inspirational for us.
It's a women's mystery, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
And the men should be at the door.
They should.
That's their instinct, is to protect the boundary and to protect the people who cross that boundary and have access to the mother.
But the culture encourages men to come in, and I have to say it, and it's an awful thing to say, but some men are traumatised.
They are.
By just being present.
They are.
And it's not true for all, of course it's not. But I think you're right to emphasise that it is a woman's mystery, and maybe, there's some good stuff in there that we could go back and look at. And,
definitely. I
think
that would be useful to have in a future podcast and some depth. Again, it's about instincts, and we do promote instincts all the time, because when people are separated from them, we know that's when problems happen.
Yeah.
Don't go after archetypes. Just don't.
No.
It's silly.
No.
It's immature. It's immature. Instincts are mature. They are so ancient. They're not even human in their origin. That's how mature they are. Okay, three more books that have influenced me hugely. I'll start with this one in the middle. More Lives Than One, the Bloxham Tapes. This was from 1976, as I recall. This was very, very interesting to me. It was a BBC documentary with someone who was very famous at the time, Magnus Magnusson, now deceased. He used to do Mastermind. I don't know if you ever remember or have heard of that.
No,
it was a hugely popular programme on TV. He heard of this hypnotist called Arnold Bloxham, who was recovering past lives in his subjects and had recorded it on tape. And when those tapes were investigated, some information was turning up that couldn't possibly have been known, but was subsequently proven through archaeology and unknown historical records. In other words, the kind of evidence that Jung claimed for archetypes, it's as valid as that, in fact even more so, because they were digging up material facts which proven or appeared at least to show a very strong correlation with the accounts produced by people under hypnosis. This was one of the books that determined for me that I should follow hypnosis as far as I could go with it. I'd experimented with it, but this was so important. And also at the beginning there's a quote from Jung as well, which helped me. I'll just read it out if I can. Should be able to find it. With a free and open mind, I listen attentively to the Indian doctrine of rebirth and look around in the world of my own experience to see whether somewhere and somehow there is some authentic sign pointing towards reincarnation. And you can see I've signed it 1976, which is when I got the book. I also read a eulogy from this at my mother's funeral from the Bhagavad Gita. Oddly, the Church of England minister came and thanked me afterwards. I think he probably thought it was Christian, some obscure text that he hadn't heard, but no, it was pure Hinduism. Reason being, actually, my mother bought me the book. Anyway, I won't go there because it's too emotional, probably, and perhaps inappropriate at the moment. But that was very, very important. It fascinated me with respect to regression therapy and regression hypnosis, about whether it could work. Still an important book. I know James has got a copy of it, which is really
We've also
good.
done some past life regression for the IPSA students as well.
Yes, we have. We've actually done it as a demonstration with James, and we got a few very interesting results from that.
We did.
So it's the kind of thing we look at technically on our training courses, and it was a demonstration film which James very kindly allowed himself to be filmed for.
That's right.
Stanislav Grof, one of the pioneers of working with psychedelic drugs in psychotherapy, he's quoted a lot these days. These books are from the 1970s. Shows how far back I personally was looking at them. The Human Encounter with Death is interesting again, because they talk about how some of these regression hypnosis experiences go beyond what could have possibly been recorded in a genome, because you can't record in your genome your own death. So it wasn't a case of an inherited memory in a biological sense. So that was fascinating. There are other people Pauline has studied who have looked at near-death experiences, but this was one of the salient ones that stuck out to me at the time. Particularly in relationship to this one here, which is Realms of the Human Unconscious. That has a lot to do with using psychedelics to expand one's mind and explore different things. Again, because Grof is such a man of integrity and purpose, despite me feeling a disinclination to think that this was a particularly legitimate way of exploring the psyche, I respected him and still do. And this is a book which, along with this one, which I keep close to my heart, as something that influenced me very heavily when I was younger, and that I have tested out as much as I can without actually using psychedelics in terms of its basic premises, and whether you can achieve something similar without using mind-altering substances. Because for me, that's not authentic. If you mess with your brain chemistry, you have no way of validating whether that's an actual experience that would have occurred naturally under an individuation process. And that's regardless of any consideration of mushrooms, commercialised shamans in South America or anywhere else. I've done plenty of other things, been involved with lots of mystery traditions and very weird, Chinese usually, rituals, including conjuring up spirits and gods and demon possession and all that stuff. Been through all of that. You don't need psychedelics to access that stuff, but again, I would say this is a landmark book in this particular field and has overlap with regression hypnosis and all the different altered states of consciousness. So yeah, I'd recommend them.
It's just a couple more for the ladies. This one is The Wounded Woman by Linda Schertzy Leonard, I think it's pronounced. Healing the father-daughter relationship. That's that one there.
And the father complex.
And the father complex,
tradition.
yes, absolutely. And this one is about female initiation by Banny Shorter, Jungian therapist, called An Image Darkly Forming.
Can I just add that she is also interviewed in Jung, The Wisdom of the Dream, Banny Shorter.
Yes.
If you want to see her in her own words.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, what people enjoy to read is very personal, really, isn't it? And the way in which things are written as well. This is probably a little bit more structured. This is a bit loose. Again, both of them have case studies in, which are always illustrative, I think, in terms of allowing people to understand the theory more fully. There's some reference to instincts in this one as well, although they don't, Jungians by and large tend not to develop the idea of instincts. They kind of get there and then move away from it, which is a great shame, really. It's as if they know that it should be addressing them, but they don't quite.
There's a historical reason, isn't there, for that?
Yeah.
You want me to mention
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
The problem comes about when Freud and Jung split. Freud was so heavily identified with instinct. And then there's an overlap which you can get in Freud's 5 essays from Clark University in 1909. He went there with Jung and several other psychoanalysts, and in those papers and in those presentations, Freud mentions Jung's theory of complexes very favourably and puts them into the right kind of light where they should have sat within Freud's model and would have expanded Freud's model, but they broke away soon after. And they broke away over Jung's, and this is well known, of course, over his theory of a collective psyche and the fact that, or the belief, perhaps it is a fact, that for Jung that libido was not purely sexual. It's unfair to say of Freud that he thought that libido was purely sexual. It was in service of sexuality, in other words, of biological reproduction. That's a different emphasis than saying everything is sex. But that's the common misconception that people have received through the culture, that Freud was sex obsessed. He wasn't, far from it. But the problem is when they split, they fell out so acrimoniously that they had to separate from one another completely. Freud effectively denied that complexes had any value at all, so they disappear from psychoanalysis, and Jung underrates and undervalues instincts immediately in favour of his new concept of archetypes. So the people who follow on from Freud likewise have undervalued complexes. People who follow Jung have subsequently have likewise undervalued instincts, apart from Anthony Stevens and some of the others who are developing and coming through now, in terms of instinct anyway. Sorry, love.
Oh no, you're all right.
Just
it's
historical context.
Yeah. Well, that's important, isn't it? And it's part of the frustration, really, of reading some of these texts, and that they go so far and no further.
Yeah.
But you will find reference to instinctive behaviour in them. I think out of the two, but again, like I said, it's a very personal thing. What you find informative, I would probably recommend that book over that one, if you were to make a purchase.
I'd agree. This has seemed to be very practical, hasn't it?
It is very practical.
To the women that you've worked with over the years.
It is. And then to complete the trio, this one's called Female Rage by Mary Valentis and Anne Devane. And again, quite a lot of good stuff in about instincts. The two authors, the two ladies who have written the book have a background in literature.
Interesting.
It is because my understanding is that they're not actually practicing therapists as such, but they've gone and spoken to practicing therapists and discussed their perspective on things. And I think there's quite a few references actually to Clarissa Pinkola Estes's work that we mentioned earlier in connection with Women Who Run With the Walls, references to her work, so there's quite a bit of overlap. And the other thing that I found interesting in this one too is that there's an exposition, I should say, of the myth surrounding Medusa, and we use that imagery a lot, don't we, for slaying the mother complex. So for anybody who wants to understand a little bit more about the background to that and the severed head and so on, and how that links with feminine psychology, that it's actually in this particular text. So it's quite interesting. Yeah,
excellent. That's a nice little trio, very different backgrounds.
Yes, and that's right.
Yeah. I often feel, I don't know if you'd agree, Paul, it's more from my other sort of specialism that narrative-based creatives, in other words, writers, often have a far better understanding of the psyche than psychotherapists, and certainly of academic psychologists, because by engaging with a narrative in a creative way, a fully creative way, not a prescriptive way, as in a soap opera or in a sort of a low-grade sort of television or film production, you are fully engaging with the natural turf of archetypes as cultural representations, because you have to create the whole narrative. Everything has to be in there. So writers do need to understand the through line, which is basically your individuation journey, and the nature of emotion and engagement between people and their environment. So a good writer has to naturally understand all of that. And they don't need knowledge of psychology to do it. No. In fact, an academic psychological background would be contraindicated for creativity. Yeah. Depth psychology, great. Your academic psychology, no, I would say, as preparation. Sorry to
not at all. I think that's absolutely the case, and obviously they've had to go out, like you say, to practicing therapists to get that psychological information. Yeah. But it gives a different kind of perspective on things. There's quite a bit in this one too about Freudian psychoanalysis as well. Yeah. Interestingly. But it's delivered in such a way that it's although it's quite a technical book in parts, it's still quite an easy read as well, and that's probably because of the background of the authors. Yeah.
Just to put it into some context, what I've just been saying is this is D.H. Lawrence, Fantasia of the Unconscious and Psychoanalysis and the Unconscious. So there is a globally acknowledged great writer talking about psychoanalysis. Who was the wiser? I wonder. The psychoanalysts or D.H. Lawrence?
Yeah, good question.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is just wonderful. Because of that syncretism of the human spirit in one book. Absolutely fantastic. Biographies of Freud and Jung. This is my favourite for Freud, by Ronald W. Clark. Freud, the Man and the Cause, from 1984, I think. I don't know if you can still get it, but this is brilliant. He was a great biographer, Ronald Clark. I think he did one on Einstein that was considered a classic. This is a classic as well. Knowing which biographies to go to is very important. So in balance of that, I'll just show you a couple from Jung. I've got several. Remember Anthony Stevens' one from earlier on is excellent in its own way.
Skip's gonna go.
It's a good one. Where are we now? Vincent Brown. That's a good one. And this one. Gerhard Werth. This is a very orthodox sort of Jungian one, which will be recognised by the canon. It is good. There's no doubt about that. That is a good biography of Jung. This, though, is one of my favourites. Vincent Brome, Jung, Man and Myth. Vincent Brome was a very popular writer. He wasn't a specialist in depth psychology or psychology in general, but he was a really good, popular biographer. So he's picked up and condensed a lot of facts, which in an easily digestible form, but at the same time it's informative. So I would say that one and that one for Jung, and this one for Freud, along with Anthony Stevens' book, 4 biographies of those two. Absolutely brilliant. We're coming to the end of part 1. James told me just a moment ago off camera. And there's just one thing I would like to end on. I haven't mentioned anything from Edward Edinger or James Hillman or Marie-Louise von Franz, but their works are on the shelves. The reason I'm not recommending them is twofold. One is that you can get this stuff. You don't need somebody like me to point them out.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to make a quick recommendation for everybody. That's all. Just wanted to. There we go.
Well, you could call this
a pride of place.
You could call that a biography, because that is part of the true canon of Carl Jung's personal myth. That is its relevance. That's its containing vessel as well. But anyway, where was I before you?
Edinger.
Oh yeah, I've got loads of stuff by James Hillman, Edward Edinger, Marie-Louise von Franz, all the stuff that you can get on the internet yourself in PDF form and all the rest of it. So that's one reason why I've not recommended it. The second reason is that I've no use for it. In all honesty, after 47, nearly 48 years of studying Carl Jung, I have no interest or desire anymore on the works of Edward Edinger, Marie-Louise von Franz or James Hillman. I'm sorry, but I don't find any relevance or use for them in my own life or in the life of people I work with as a therapist. There are better people out there who are more reality orientated. The danger of following those three too closely is the common one, the common pathology that you can experience with. You're smirking at. You're still smirking, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
The common pathology that you get with people who follow Jung is the trap of archetypal reductionism and inflation that comes from that, and how you get distracted from the realities of life and into that fantasy of these very powerful, seductive and inductive hypnotic images that gets produced in works like this. If you really want to develop yourself and have an orientation to reality, you need to... What's going on now?
Lots of naughty things, I think.
Where's my gun, Paul? I'll shoot the book, not James. If he happens to be holding it over a vital organ, well, that's just...
Take the bullet for me. Best use for it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's plenty of that stuff out there. If you want to indulge in this, go ahead. Go ahead. You're wasting your time. You really are wasting your time. But you don't have to listen to that piece of advice from an old fart like me who's spent, as I say, 47 years of his life studying this stuff. And even before that, I was studying Freud, analysing my own dreams, connected to creativity, and I've worked with thousands of patients. But that's just a personal opinion. Don't bother with this. It's a trap. Yeah. You do not need it. You need the kind of things that Pauline. Well, even that.
That's a better biography.
That's a better one.
Yeah,
that's someone who lived an authentic life, albeit brief, and fully created himself and brought pleasure to a lot of people.
And informed your writing.
And informed a lot of my writing as well. And guess what? I am not a Queen fan in the ordinary sense. Pauline was. In fact, I met her when she was watching a Queen concert on telly and spoiled it for her.
You did indeed. I have since forgiven you.
Oh, have you?
Yes,
I didn't know that. Thank you. It's nice to have that confirmed. I wouldn't call myself a Queen fan, but I massively respect them. And one of the things I respect is this man as a creative.
Yes, definitely.
And I think coming from someone who is not a fan as such of them, that gives it an authenticity, I hope, from the heart, that man was a wonderful creative and exemplar of how to live a full life, even though it was brief.
It was imperfect, but that doesn't matter, does it?
Compared to that... Sorry. That's a far more interesting and creative and productive life, who has reached far more people and helped them to live a fulfilling life. So I was completely ambushed there by both of them, wasn't I? Absolutely typical. Anyway, I'll just remove Ion for now. We will be returning to that. Vincent Brome's biography of Jung is very good. Ronald Clark's biography of Freud is classic. Gerhard Wehr's orthodox biography of Jung is also very good. And Anthony Stevens' book is excellent because he puts it into Jung's own model of lifespan development. Very cleverly written. So that's enough of a rant from me, and it's enough of a rant from him.
So what the is Censor that. It's
the two Ronnies, for those of you who are old enough to see it, or remember the two Ronnies. You remember them, don't you?
I do indeed.
Yeah.
Which is which? Who's
Well, I'm the shorter one, so that makes me Ronnie Corbett.
Corbett, yeah.
That makes you Ronnie Barker. But then he was the funny one. Thanks, everyone.
The fun
Thank
to
you.
look at one.
Well, indeed, absolutely. Well, narcissism just broke out, didn't it, like a fart round the room. But there you go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for watching this episode of Jung To Live By. If you haven't already, make sure you download our free PDF for integrating your shadow. It includes the most advanced theory on the topic available anywhere on the internet, as well as a full practical breakdown. If you've ever wanted to integrate your shadow, this is honestly the way to do it. Thanks again for watching, and take care.